misunderstood that interest and dedication to correct me. In terms of the transfer dashboard, we do expect, as you note, that being more transparent about where implementation is not as ideal as we would prefer it to be will add a certain amount of public pressure or incentive to be more thorough with implementation. What we have observed as HECC staff, certainly with the initial surveys we've done about implementation, the shortcomings in implementation are not so much because institutions are always reluctant, but the information has not necessarily flowed to the people who need to have it, who actually put information on the websites and are attentive to it. So there is work that we could do to make that better. And we're certainly hoping the visibility of a dashboard will help us get to that point. In the meantime, it is staff investment working with institutional representatives to get there. That's the approach we've been taking. We do know that there is no transfer jail as such, but there might be some mechanisms, and I will perhaps invite our executive director, Ben Cannon, to make some comment. There might be some opportunity to have more than just the public visibility and transparency to get us there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Mr. Singer.
I just, not so much a question, just I wanted to say, I appreciate the reports and the information. I'm glad to hear that the work is accelerating. That's very good news. And I want to really underscore the importance of the faculty participation that I've seen reflected in the reports. I think that's a really heartening to learn about. I will be interested to and look forward to learning more about the student experience once implementation is further rolled out, and hearing that student voice and their experience. And I understand that we're still it's still in early stages, but that is something that I would really be interested in and look forward to learning more about their students entering through that process. And I appreciate Co-Chair Heyman's focus on the goals and really, I think, bringing the student experience into the more explicitly into the conversation when we're hearing the reports.
Thank you, Commissioner Simnett. We do hope that at the retreat planned for next week, there will be some detailed conversation about how to measure success. And we have understood, I think in the previous commission meeting, Chair Rowe did indicate a strong interest in understanding the student experience as separate from how we might measure, progress on implementation, how many institutions are implementing and how many courses have come through. And so part of the work will be trying to figure out from a methodological perspective how to bring in student voice and understand the experience, selecting courses and getting them through from one sector to another. Perhaps a more qualitative approach with focus groups and so on. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Transfer Council will be having that conversation next week.
I'm delighted to hear about the retreat you're having and being able to meet in person to look at this. And also just want to acknowledge and appreciate I think successfully showed the complexity of the work and certainly the amount of work that goes into it, but really the complexity and why it is difficult. And it also showed the progress that has been made, especially recently. So to have those two things in the report and brought it to life for me, and I do appreciate it. And also, since he's in the room, want to acknowledge and thank Kyle Thomas for all he has done to keep this going all these several years and to make the progress we have made, in addition to everyone you named at the beginning. So thank you. Any other questions? If not, oh, yes.
Thank you, Chair Rowe.
One more.
Oh.
Sorry, she probably can't see.
Thank you, Chair Rowe, and thank you, Veronica, for your really comprehensive presentation. I want to go back to something that Commissioner Middleton had said about what the enforcement was for noncompliance for institutions that were required to be part of it. And I also wanted to ask about patterns that that you and your department have been seeing with difficulties with compliance. I noticed that a lot of these schools are having a lot of success in implementation of common course numbering, but other schools seem to have struggled. It looks, based on this, it looks like TVCC hasn't managed to is required to do common course numbering for a number of different programs, but have not managed to implement any of them, for example. So I wondered what sort of help was being extended to those institutions so they could be in compliance.
Thank you for these questions and observations. Very good questions. And I will ask if my colleague, Kyle Thomas, can help with a response.
I thought he was on.
Half trade is the origin of the term transfer. That's years ago. So I'll answer part of your question. Maybe Ryan can help with the other part of the question. I'll deal with like what options and possibilities exist for enforcement, because this is a topic that we have looked at pretty closely over the course of the last few years. And frankly, the options for enforcement are limited. The establishing law, of course, provides a lot of authority to HECC to facilitate and ensure that institutions are conducting the activities that are required by law. It establishes mechanisms for HECC to audit compliance. But what we, I think, have come to learn is that when the law requires us to ensure the establishment and implementation of the system, that is otherwise limited by the authorities that we have in statute over institutions generally, and how those authorities were or were not conceived to be used in a manner to force compliance in the area of transfer. So, I'll throw out an example that would be a really firm mechanism of enforcement, which is funding, right? We are not by law able to use the funding formula coercively. I'm just using that as an example. You can apply that sort of coercive use of HECC authorities generally speaking when it comes to transfer, and make the assumption that the legal answer is no, we can't use those authorities in that manner. So more firm mechanisms of enforcement, more punitive measures of enforcement would necessitate a statutory change. We are not pursuing or recommending the pursuit of a statutory change at this time, largely because I think, and I'll turn it back to Veronica, that the implementation challenges are overcomable if institutions are working in good faith, and that implementation is uneven because some schools are smaller and less staffed, or that the changes that were made in the transfer maps or common course numbering require those institutions to make more changes to their programs than another institution would have had to make to their program. Or that there are just kind of technology systems issues on the registrar side that take a little bit more time to work out. If as time goes on, we continue to see that uneven implementation, I think that would signal that there are deeper problems than we are prepared to say that there are at present. And I'll turn it back to Ron.
Yes, I would agree with your assessment, Carl, about the explanatory factors for the levels of non-compliance that we see. They're mostly structural challenges in that sphere rather than an intent not to follow through.
Okay. Appreciate that. There's always shame. But we really appreciate it. We always appreciate it. And we know that you are pursuing it and that most schools are trying to do it and trying to do it virtually all and trying to do it full speed ahead. So we do understand that and appreciate it. Okay, this is an action item. We need to accept this report.
So
you. And a second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you again for the progress on this and for the report itself.
Thank
We
you.
are breaking for lunch and stop the recording. Commissioners, we do need to come back at 1 because we have a guest who's going to educate us on enrollment management systems, which I really look forward to. So you are going to eat quickly.
We're in recess.
We are in recess.
John, we're going to get started here in a minute.
That's great. Thank you. Is my volume okay?
Yes, you're coming through well.
Thank you. Okay, I'll wait for you. Got three. If it's possible, I would prefer to run it from my computer, if that's okay.
Certainly.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me know when you're ready for me to start the show.
I think we're ready.
Yes, we are ready.
Okay.
We are back in session. And Ben?
Yeah, so I'm really pleased to welcome John Beckenstead to the commission. As you see, John, and I'll introduce himself, of course, but John is at Oregon State University and leads enrollment management for that university. And he's been at OSU a while, but has a long career in higher education. And in addition to the work that he does to lead Oregon State, he's quite prominent in national higher education circles. If you read, as I do, the Chronicle of Higher Education or Inside Higher Ed, you have likely seen some of John's contributions there. I also am a fan, I don't know if he knows this, but I read his blog that he publishes, I think, separately from his work for OSU, because it takes a very much a national perspective on higher education. So really, one of the nation's leaders in helping the public and the community at large understand the dynamics of higher education enrollment, admissions, pricing, et cetera. And in what I believe to be one of his last weeks formally at Oregon State University before retirement, if I have that correct, John, that you can share. We're really pleased to have him here. This came about as a result of, just so you're aware, a result of some collaboration with Oregon's public university provosts, who had suggested that from time to time, the HECC get a deeper understanding of some of the dynamics at play at our public universities. And so John will present on behalf of OSU and to some extent on behalf of the provosts of Oregon public universities. I think it's over to you now,
John. Is Ed Fazer here? Is he going to say something first, or do you want me to take it away?
Oh, yeah, Ed did say he would. I forgot about that. Is he on?
He is on. And Provost Fazer, I've just promoted you.
We apologize for our technical difficulties.
Thank you. Didn't have any audio or video there for a minute. So I was going to say all the things Ben just said, and so I don't need to say them all, other than to say this was a great opportunity to hear from John before he disappears from Oregon. And I've asked him to really take a kind of national perspective on trends in enrollment management, enrollment generally, but in enrollment management, and talk about some of the ways different universities around the country, but specifically us in Oregon, are navigating this particular demographic challenges, but also shifts in approach. And so thanks so much for the opportunity to have this conversation with you.
Great. So I just want to do a sound check to make sure that my volume is okay in the room.
Mm-hmm. We can hear you well.
Okay, and I want to make sure that you're seeing the full screen presentation rather than my display for presenter, right?
We are not seeing the presentation.
You're not seeing a presentation?
No.
Okay, let me see if I can share. Hold on. I thought I did.
It's coming through now.
Okay, great. Thank you. I thought I had clicked that button. Well, thank you for having me. As Ed said, I am, and Ben said, I will be at Oregon State for a few more months yet. I've been here about 5 years, and it's a pleasure to give you my perspective on how enrollment management works, how it's evolved over time, and why it's necessary. I don't think there's a profession inside higher education, unless it's maybe provost, that's less understood than what we do in enrollment management. And when I started back in 1983 in the profession, no one really cared about it. And now it seems to be a focus of a lot of attention. So I'm happy to lend my perspective on it. I'm going to give you a quick, before I dive into this, 3-slide summary of where we've been and where we are now. And so you can see, there we go. When I tell people that in 1940, about 4% of adults over 25 had a college degree or greater, they are generally incredulous. They do not believe that. People think there's errors in the data. This is directly from the Census Bureau, and so I trust it, and it has a lot of validity. What's even more interesting is that if you look at the greatest generation, those people who were adults in the early 1940s, the majority of the people who fought in World War II had an 8th grade education or less. That's represented by the purple bars for 5th to 8th grade. And then 13% of that population had a 4th grade education or lower. One of the great successes of America, and one of the great successes, of course, of the GI Bill, although it didn't apply equally to everybody, is the ramp up of this dark blue section, which is at least a bachelor's degree, going from about 4% in 1940 to almost 38% in 2020. If you roll in the other 25% of Americans in this light blue bar who have at least some college education, it's really a remarkable testament to what we've accomplished in the country. At the same time, this is data from the Federal Reserve in St. Louis. The adjusted real median family income in the United States from the early 50s till about 2021 has more than doubled. It's gone from about $38,000 to just something over $100,000 per year. Now, you can argue which of those two is the cause and the effect. Some say it's the increase in education. Some say it's the increase in income that drove people to seek education. I think they co-vary a lot, but it's really a test. I don't think there's ever been an increase in family income over this period in the history of the world that we've seen in the United States post-World War II. And now, if you flash forward to today, we are thinking a little less of higher education as a large societal benefit, I think, as education comes under a lot of scrutiny and a lot of inspection by people from the outside. But now people are thinking of things like net present value of going to a public university. And the states are being ranked and compared based on whether that education at a public university is in fact worth what people are paying for it. And so, I mean, if you think about the shift in perspectives in the country, I don't know that there are 2 or 3 slides that can do it better than that. But if you know me, I'm going to keep talking anyway. So I want to back up a little bit and talk about like the ship in the middle of the desert. You kind of have to wonder how we got here. And so I'm going to take a brief look at 3 different snapshots in time as a sort of setup to how we got where we are today. I want to start in 1967 in the middle of the Vietnam War, jump forward to 1980, and you'll find that there was one person at those 2 interesting pivot points, one single person at both of those interesting pivot points about 13 years apart. And then I'll jump forward to excuse me, to today and talk about how enrollment management plays out, what we do, and how we approach the challenges. In February 1967, in the height of the Vietnam War, Ronald Reagan was elected, or was a newly elected governor of the state of California. And he said in a speech, which was really ostensibly about the protesters against the Vietnam War, that he didn't think the state of California, given its budget crisis at the time, was obligated to pay for students' intellectual luxuries. And by that, he specifically pointed out a class at, I think, UC Davis or UC Santa Cruz that was titled Protest, How to Protest or the Protest Movement. And it made it clear that college was more like a business that was serving students in the state of California. The idea of free tuition at the UC system, which was and probably still is considered the crowning glory of American higher education, was going to be a thing of the past. And so colleges were going to have to start charging tuition in order to generate the revenue that they needed, because the taxpayers were not going to be funding it anymore. And as we like to say in enrollment management, when California catches a cold, America sneezes. This set off a series of actions by states across the country that said, if a system like California can start charging tuition, perhaps we don't have to fund higher education the way we thought we formerly did. Education was seen largely, as a result of that GI Bill and that ramp up in attainment, as a public good, and it was something that people aspired to for their children, and taxpayers were generally less reluctant to fund higher education within the state. This set up a really easy scenario for public colleges and universities. They could start charging tuition, but at the same time, they were still largely an enormously good deal and enormously high quality. And that's a really hard thing to beat in the marketplace. When you're cheap and really good, people have a hard time bettering that or doing better in the market. When Reagan spoke, it appears that students and parents got that message pretty quickly. Every year, UCLA does a survey of incoming freshman students and asks them about the reasons they're going to college. And they rate maybe 20 or 30 different variables. If you look at the purple line, that's the percentage of first-year students who said that developing a meaningful philosophy of life was one of the essential reasons that they went to college. And so in 1967, that was 85%, 86% of students. By the time we got to 2015, when this SERP study was published, it was under half of the students saying that's one of the reasons they were the essential reasons for going to college. By the sort of opposite, the flip perspective of that is that in 1966, 42% of students said being well off financially was an essential or a very important part of their decision. By 2015, that had risen to 81, almost 82%. And so what's interesting is these two things, these two essential reasons that students consider when they're going to college, had essentially flip-flopped in importance. And I think there's no more telling graph than this. If you look on this chart, this is about the time Ronald Reagan got elected president, and it carries out and continues increasing after that time. So I want to fast forward to 1980, after skipping over the 60s and the Vietnam War and the 70s. Colleges were already facing what they saw was the first demographic cliff. This is a nationwide view of the number of public high school graduates in the United States. And so if you were born in 1957 or 1958, like I was, you were at the very tail end of the peak of the baby boom. The most people ever born in the United States prior to recently was 1957, and there were something like 4 million live births in that year. This was a function of the GIs who would come home, started families, and began to age, and were no longer having children. So those students hit high school graduation years in 1975, 1976, somewhere in there, and colleges could already see that by 1980, they would lose 100,000 students in the pool. And by the time 1991 rolled around, they would be down another 600,000 students. So this is an existential crisis, of course, for colleges and universities. And they did exactly what a business would do. They diversified their offerings So for instance, they started offering evening and weekend classes. They started catering and tailoring academic programs to adults who had never had an opportunity to go to college. They started expanding graduate programs, believing that maybe the bachelor's was going to be, or the master's was going to be the new bachelor's degrees. And those too were offered on evenings and weekends, designed not to be for the full-time student, but for the part-time student. And so because of that business orientation, colleges actually survived these years in the mid-'80s into the '90s, actually quite well. Costs were still attainable and affordable. Government support was still high. And so colleges rode out this important first demographic cliff. And I know demographic cliff is something you hear about a lot as we look forward, and I'll share some data about that in a minute too. Then of course, 1980 was the year of Ronald Reagan's election, and this is about as close to a mandate as you're ever likely to see in American politics. It's interesting, the states, Georgia, West Virginia, that were blue in 1980, and all the other states, including California, that were red in that time. But this is, again, sort of in some sense, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of a lot of historians, a universal mandate of the low taxes, aggressive business orientation, focusing on every man for himself, every person for themselves, moving forward and trying to generate the sort of ethos and the perspective that American business and American ingenuity and those sort of things are coming to the forefront. And at that same time, starting in 1980, this is Sheff and Shio data, we see national adjusted averages for support for higher education normalized to $1,000 in personal income, dropping pretty precipitously. So in 1981, about $9.50 for every $1,000 in personal income went to support higher education in the United States, public higher education in the United States. By the time we got to 2022, that had fallen to about $5.50. So almost in half, but not quite. Now, every state, if you look at the Sheff-Shio data, is different in this regard. But it's nice to normalize this and see this as not an issue in Oregon or Montana or New York or California, but in the national trend that all the states seem to be following and moving toward. Another sort of business orientation that hit in the early 80s was U.S. News and World Report and their best colleges ranking. And suddenly, colleges which had thought of themselves as a public good, doing public service, mostly at the behest of the government, found themselves in competition with each other in ways that they never had before. They were actually being evaluated on statistical criteria that some of them figured out very early it would be good to manipulate in order to move up in the rankings. Because in higher education, we have a lot of commoditization. I personally have been doing this over 40 years, and I could not tell you for the life of me which history department on the West Coast is the best history department. They are largely, at least in the mind of the consumers and sometimes in the mind of historians, teaching the same things to students in the same ways that they have for a long time. But U.S. News and World Report suddenly burst upon the scenes and started making micro distinctions between and among colleges based on things like alumni giving rates, admission rates, and what it offered. The only thing that we really have as the coin of the realm in higher education is prestige. And that was the thing that U.S. News and World Report offered colleges and universities. I don't think it's a coincidence that the last year in America that college cost grew at about the same rate of inflation was 1981 or 1982. You see all this attitude change. You see state funding for higher education falling. You see a sort of very conservative, Republican, libertarian sense of every person for themselves, go out, fight in the market. You see the sense that market orientation is really good, and colleges responding to that felt they needed to improve their product, felt they needed to position themselves differently, and started raising tuition and fees way faster than inflation. Sometimes in many of these years, twice the rate of inflation. It's sort of not really a watershed moment, but if you look at a watershed, maybe 4 or 5 years, there really seemed to be a shift in how colleges approach the market and what colleges were doing with it. And although median income in the US, as I showed you before, started going up and has gone up, the distribution of income in the United States going back to 1980s is really dramatically different. So the dark orange and then lighter orange and then blue and then darker blue bars show income by the percentile, by the deciles. And so people in the 95th percentile, as you see in this top chart in the top right corner, are doing a heck of a lot better than people in the 10th percentile down here as far as the growth and how far they've come. And so at the same time that you see this dispersion of income starting to widen, you see increasing pressure on colleges to provide more access and to do more for low-income students. In fact, part of that was altruistic, of course, in the sense that we had the larger mission and needed to do what we needed to do in order to make society better. Part of it was strictly a business decision, that you saw that demographic cliff coming. Colleges could appeal to more low-income students. Some federal programs did increase, like the Pell Grant, and made it more accessible and more affordable for students to go to college. It was a reasonably good time to be in colleges and universities. And so what happens at public institutions is the actual dollars that you see on the top, adjusted dollars for what a family and a student has to pay out of pocket to go to a public university in America has increased pretty dramatically. It's essentially tripled since 1980. And that's because, again, falling state revenues, increase in low-income students who are using university dollars to attend and to afford, and the student share of educational cost has gone up as well. Some of these numbers are a little bit deflated by COVID and the sort of sea change that affected in higher education, but also some of the federal funding that came in to push these numbers down. If we hadn't had COVID, my guess is that it would still be somewhere in the mid 40s to maybe high 40s going forward. So we see that the burden of paying, even for public education nationally, has been shifted onto the backs of students and away from the taxpayers and the governments. And if you can only read one thing about higher education, I recommend reading this. It was prescient. It was in the January 31st, 1997 Chronicle of Higher Education. Arthur Levine suggests that what we were experiencing was a shift in government orientation that treated higher education like a mature industry. He predicted accurately that healthcare had gone through that and that government would be more interested in scrutinizing what we did, how we did it, would fund it at a lower rate, and that colleges and universities would have to compete with more fundraising, more admissions, more marketing, more all of the business things that businesses do, but colleges and universities were never happy with doing or never thought they would have to do. Fast forward to the present tense and how this all comes together. Just to recap, the value of college is under scrutiny. We have swings in high school graduates. You'll see what's going to happen in Oregon in a minute when I show you that chart. And in fact, there's just new data from WICHE out yesterday. I haven't analyzed it yet, but at the preliminary look, it looks pretty bad for us going out to 2041. More diversity, both ethnic and socioeconomic, which means different college populations have different natural orientations toward higher education. Declining state and federal support. We are attempting to do everything we can to differentiate ourselves, to avoid that commoditization of higher education. It's not always a winning battle that we're fighting, but we're doing our best. Students are acting like customers. It's much more transactional today than it ever has been. And the talk is career preparation. How are you preparing me for a job? You saw very early on that sense that you can measure college as a net present value or return on investment. And those are the things that are driving a lot of student support. Shift in the locus of control. When I started in 1983, we were in charge of everything. Every message that went out, if students wanted to apply, they had to come to us first and ask for an application or ask for materials. Now, our message, the perception of the university, is largely distributed throughout thousands, if not millions of people in the public. We have some, but we have very little control over what happens and what people say about us. And then a sort of winner takes all mentality. And again, as I said before, the race for prestige is palatable and noticeable. And if you don't believe me, this is a screenshot from Vanderbilt University in September of 2022, when Vanderbilt rose to number 13 among the nation's top universities in the latest US News and World Report rankings. So they went to number 13. A year later, they fell to number 18 when US News and World Report revised its criteria. And the chancellor and the provost at Vanderbilt said that US News and World Report was incompetent for their methodology because Vanderbilt dropped from 13th to 18th. They were still considered in this ranking, which is just an opinion, the 18th best university in the country, and they were incensed about it. What you don't see here is that a year later, the chancellor and the provost hired a consultant to dive into the US News and World Report rankings and determine exactly how flawed they were, precisely because it wasn't treating them the way they thought they would. And to top it all off, as I was on LinkedIn literally 2 days ago, I saw this ad: the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Crisis, Reputation, and Issues Management at Vanderbilt University. I think there can be no more proof of how important that external validation and that prestige is to colleges and universities and what you see there. So let's take a look at how this affects us in Oregon. WICHE data shows that we will see about a 10% drop in high school graduates from our peak year in 2026 to 2036. WICHE suggests by the year 2041, it's going to drop 20% from 2026, the new data that just came out yesterday. If Oregon public universities did nothing to either increase the percentage of students going to school, to college, or attract students from outside the state of Oregon, we would be setting ourselves up for long-term failure. The state of Oregon and the population likely cannot sustain itself with at least with regard to the public university system. At the same time, Oregon students who graduate from high school are going out of state and out of region in greater numbers than they ever have. So the students who do graduate from Oregon high schools are leaving the state in greater numbers than they ever have before. This is from IPED's data. They do every 2 years migration of students from one state to another, from one institution to another. And you can see that our students, just between 2020 and 2022, lost about 3 percentage points of the students who stay within the state of Oregon. That's the big orange bar there. This has forced public universities in the state to seek non-resident enrollment for a couple reasons. One is just filling the dorms, filling the classrooms, building and maintaining our capacity. So the flagship and the land grant in Oregon in the year 2000 attracted about 22% of our freshmen from out of state. That's now up to about 50%. And the good thing here, the really good thing here, is that we are not I can't speak for our colleagues at U of O, but I get a very strong sense that it's the same. We are not denying qualified Oregon residents admission to the university. So it's not like we're Berkeley, where if we take a student from out of state, we have to deny a student from Oregon. We're saying y'all come. And if you're from Oregon, you're still welcome here. But we're filling greater percentage of our campus capacity with students from out of state. And that is, for us, a positive revenue thing. And I think for the state, it's a good thing too. This trend is duplicated in other states. So I took all of the other states other than Oregon and took a look at them. And you can see that they've gone from 22% non-residents to 35% non-residents. And of course, this number would be bigger if it weren't for California, which takes and Texas and Florida, which the biggest states, which take the vast majority of students from in-state. And so I always say my job is to make everybody on campus a little bit unhappy, because all the things that a university might want are sometimes in conflict with each other. For instance, we need to generate revenue. I mean, that's not a secret. We need to operate this like a business, but we also have, and we consider part of our mission to be low-income Oregonians. And those students require financial aid, either from some source, and if it's not coming from the federal government or the state government, it comes from our own operations. And so that's money right off the bottom. We want to offer access, but we also recognize that many students have a better chance of earning a degree if they start at a community college. We are actively pursuing additional and better partnerships with the state's community colleges to make sure that every student has a pathway to an OSU degree. Again, we wanted to provide access, but we also have issues regarding public reputation, things like selectivity, retention rates, and student outcomes all fight against more access. You don't see a lot of high access institutions that have good outcomes on selectivity, retention, or other student outcomes. And then we want to create a university that's the best possible university for the state of Oregon residents to come and learn and prosper at, right? But at the same time, sometimes that means attracting students from out of state, and we want to be an attractor of talent, of tuition revenue, of potentially students who are going to graduate and become tax-paying residents of the state of Oregon. And doing that, bringing students from out of state, really helps us in that regard. And so in short, I'm wrapping up here. Enrollment management is really a natural and necessary response to those external market pressures that the industry never asked for, but got imposed upon us just by economic and political realities. Enrollment management looks at admissions, financial aid, student success, and all of those nasty business functions, like generating revenue, something we don't like to talk about all the time, as one big picture rather than discrete functions which sometimes work against each other. And then we try to find what I call that sweet spot between those trade-offs. And so again, I know I've done my job when nobody on campus is really completely happy, because every time you pull in one direction, somebody gets angry about where you're moving in the other. So I'm wrapping up. I'm going to leave some time for questions. Thank you very much for inviting me. I've been eager to do this and finally get a chance to before I retire in a few months. I'm very easy to find and contact. I am the only person on the planet with this name. So if you just Google John Bockenstead, you will find me, at least for a few months at Oregon State. And I am now happy to answer questions, take feedback, listen to what I got wrong, or promise to provide more information going forward. So.
Thank you very much. Yes, questions?
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank you for this report. It was informative and entertaining, I would say. And I wonder if you might address the percentage, what your thoughts are about the percentage of students who do not fill out and complete the FAFSA. And
yeah,
what we can do to increase those numbers.
Well, so I don't, I like to say I couldn't predict where my own two children were going to college a week before the deadline. So motivating 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds and understanding them is not, believe it or not, my strong suit. But I think, first of all, I think Oregon did a phenomenal job with the FAFSA debacle last year in making sure that we caught up to our FAFSA completion ratios. We look at other states and they did not do nearly a job. So whatever we were doing over the past year, all the bits and pieces that came together in order to increase FAFSA completion, congratulations, because it worked. And we actually see our Oregon numbers go up this year. But with regard to, getting more students to participate, I think there are programs like our Gear Up, like our pre-college programs, like Juntos, like all the things that we do in extension, our new Access OSU initiative that are designed to work with not just high schools, but parents and students at the parent and student level, sometimes in community-based organizations, sometimes in other not-for-profits and NGOs, where they're working with students on a one-to-one basis. And we have to blanket the high schools, of course. We have to work with them. We have to make opportunities available to those students. But where we pick up traction and where we gain, where we aren't doing well, I think is reaching out to those communities and those people that are traditionally very underserved by higher education, including counties east of the Cascades, where rural issues and sometimes other job opportunities compete against higher education.
Thank you.
Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Chair Rowan, and thank you, John, for your presentation. I noticed that in one of your charts, the chart specifically of the proportion of Oregon students who were going in-state, out-of-state, and to regional universities, I noticed that the only other time where there was a large, statistically significant dip in the proportion of students attending in-state universities was from 1998 to 2000, and the number recalibrated itself in the years after that. Do you have any idea what might have caused that dip and what was done to correct it?
I don't have any idea about why I wasn't in the state of Oregon at that time, so I don't know. And I'm not as proficient as I am in the history of state politics, state funding. So sometimes things happen for reasons we'll never understand. And again, when it's that far back, I can't offer an opinion even. Maybe someone else who was here certainly could.
Fair enough. I just had the question. I wondered if you had knowledge.
Other questions?
I guess I just have
Yes.
a statement. Disguised as a question. And that is, I notice, at least our work here on the HECC board, I think because of the constraints, we're trying to get money from the legislature, we're trying to prove the value of higher education to not only the legislature, but the people of the state of Oregon and also consumers. We have completely adopted that framing of how to get ahead through a college degree. And I've never heard, at least in my limited time on this board, us talking about, an overarching philosophical approach to life kind of reasoning for going to the university. And I think it's not because we don't care about that here or that people don't care about that, but we're responding to that upward trajectory of students, our consumers, calling them consumers, they care about attaining a high income, and that's very important to our tax base. So there's a lot of structural reasons, but I wonder how much those feed into each other actually. If we don't talk about education, this is a new observation, but if we don't talk about education as something that improves your philosophy and your approach to life and how you care about others and how you think about the world. I wonder if that doesn't feed into this kind of an ideology about education being a means to get a job, to make a wage, to be a good taxpayer.
I don't want to sound like the old guy yelling at the clouds. So, you know, I'd love to wave a magic wand and change the way people think about education. I know that it's impossible to do, and things like that change very slowly. And frankly, I'm not the person to say how we could change that. But you know, I think it would be better if we could think about education as a good in its own, an intrinsic good, rather than just necessarily a means to an end. On the other hand, college costs 3 times more than it used to when I was adjusted for inflation when I was in college. And parents and students probably are acting in exactly a rational, natural way to that increase in price. You know, it's an investment in money, it's an investment in time. And if people want to think about it in that present value, I understand that. I may not think it's the greatest idea, but it's certainly not a surprise that people act that way.
Well, if you would help me square that and the price sensitivity and the massive price increases over the last 30 years with sort of almost at a microeconomic level, the forces you were pointing out in terms of society pointing more to each person for himself and success and how success is defined. Because when you look, if we reduced Tech's job to our job is to get more Oregonians pursuing post-secondary education. If that were our only job, then by any measure, we are not succeeding. We are both following a national trend that is declining, and we are declining, well, if not declining more, we are behind the national average on those who choose to pursue it. When I moved here 30 years ago, that was all easily explained because, oh, we're shifting from the forestry economy where you didn't even need a college degree or post-secondary in order to have high wages. So I guess I'm trying to find a question here, but it really goes to how do we who pursue this work find ways to have greater success for students if all the forces and the prices seem aligned against it? What can change or improve this picture?
I don't know the answer to that, but I know there are places that are doing a phenomenally good job. So for instance, if you look at a state, it's very surprising to me that the state of Florida does the best job in the country with low-income students going on to a 4-year college. 2 years ago, for families with under $30,000 in income, the net price at the University of Florida was minus $250. They were being literally paid to go to college. And I don't know what combination of state programs, state grants, restraint on tuition, whatever happened, but I think we could learn a lot from Florida. And for me, this is a very personal thing. My parents both had 8th grade educations, and so they were part of that World War II generation who never went to high school. And so for me to be where I am today is only because the state of Iowa invested in me. And I look at Iowa, my home state, which used to be a very progressive, forward-looking state, and now has the nickname of Florida without the beaches, right? It's done a complete flip-flop in its political and its progressive orientation. And frankly, Oregon reminds me a lot of Iowa, the people here, the orientation. And I certainly hope that what has happened to my home state doesn't happen here. You know, I think that's all something that we need to be aware of and we need to fight against going forward. How you do that, I really am at a loss to say. But I would look at states that do it well, frankly.
And so given what you know now, the single biggest factor that could change and improve college post-secondary going rates would be cost.
Well, I think that's certainly cost has an awful lot to do with students being willing to attend, but I think there are things we can do in high schools about career preparation and college preparation and just letting students know what their options are. I think it's kind of a miracle that I ended up in college because no one ever talked to me about it. I just kind of ended up there because that was just kind of expected at my high school. But I could have easily been working on a dock or driving a truck for a living, had not a lot of happy accidents happen to me. And what I'm worried about is those really bright students who should be in college, who think it's not right for them or they can't afford it. I think we need to do a better job as a state and as a nation of letting students helping students be aware of that opportunity and that potential to do better for themselves.
Thank you. Other questions? This is just a splendid report, and we are so grateful, especially as you were counting down the months, and I assume leaving Oregon. We are so grateful to have had you and to have your insight on this complicated and important subject. And a lot of us who weren't following you or your work before will now be doing that.
Thank you. Thank you. And I did share my presentation, and so it can be distributed and you can take it home and dive into the data if you're interested.
Thank you, Ed, also for helping make this happen. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
And I'll just note that that report is in the materials as exhibit number 4. It's in the, exhibit 3. It's been posted and put in the chat.
Okay, and we can download it ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Good, thank you. Okay. Next on the agenda, that's just terrific. Thank you for scheduling it. Okay, now we are strategic activity reporting still on Future Ready Oregon. Jennifer Purcell. Was it the legislature this morning?
And I think Jennifer and Amy have gotten really good at this presentation because this is the third time in this week. Yes, that was great.
I was prepared to do that in case. Video on. I don't have yours. I've got. Okay, perfect. Are you all seeing this? Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon. Chair Rowe, Vice Chair Heyman, members of the commission, for the record, my name is Jennifer Purcell. I'm the Director for Future Ready Oregon here at the HECC. And I am excited to be sharing with you an overview on updates for Future Ready Oregon. I'm going to review what Future Ready set out to accomplish, highlight a bit of what we're learning through those investments, and share some updates specifically on the work of our industry consortia and our Workforce Ready grant funded projects. And then Amy is going to take over and provide you a presentation on the third annual report, including data about participation, services, and early employment outcomes. Okay. So let's start with what Future Ready Oregon set out to accomplish. It is a $200 million package of investments that work together to advance a more equitable workforce system and increase opportunities for diverse learners by centering the needs of historically underserved and underrepresented communities and focusing on key sectors of our economy. And in 2022, the Oregon Legislature made this historic investment in workforce education and training, which included an array of programs that were intended to work together to advance diverse workforce and really emphasize alignment across our workforce education and training ecosystem.
The legislature and the Racial Justice Council charged Future Ready Oregon with implementing and administering these programs that were intended to approach workforce and talent development differently, acknowledging that a one-size-fits-all approach is not sufficiently expanding our labor force. It is not adequately meeting our workforce needs, and it's not serving the diverse needs of communities across Oregon. To date, all of the Future Ready Oregon funding has been obligated through grant funding and strategic initiatives that aim to grow and diversify Oregon's workforce, closing gaps in educational attainment and employment, and strengthening Oregon's economic competitiveness. So what is Future Ready Oregon teaching us? These investments in innovative approaches to education and training were intended to inform future workforce and talent development investments by identifying promising practices, replicable and scalable strategies. These 4 pillars are essential to effectively increasing and diversifying Oregon's workforce. In order to increase opportunities for diverse workers, programs and policies must center the needs of historically underserved and marginalized communities, ensuring that education and training is responsive to the needs of learners. Focusing on key sectors of our economy is providing for sector strategies that address critical workforce shortages and strategic workforce opportunities, strengthening Oregon's economic competitiveness. Partnerships ensure that community, education, and industry are working collaboratively towards a common goal. And flexible funding must consider both systems, capacity, and student supports, coupling education and training with comprehensive wraparound services to meet basic needs and ensure that students have the resources they need to be successful. Future Ready Oregon represents a fundamental shift in how we are delivering education and training to meet the needs of individuals and employers today and into the future. Traditionally, an individual would be on the outside of the system, trying to identify the appropriate entry point and relevant services. And Future Ready Oregon advances an ecosystem approach where education, industry, and community partners are aligned and responsive to the needs of learners and workers. We have a unique opportunity to leverage our assets and improve coordination across post-secondary education and the public workforce system. And Future Ready Oregon made significant investments in new and innovative approaches to education and training that center partnerships and collaboration. Future Ready is investing in local workforce development boards and the public workforce system, in community colleges and universities, community-based organizations and other educational institutions, and workforce service providers, ensuring that these partners are aligned and working collaboratively. Future Ready Oregon advances a shared leadership model where education and training providers, industry leaders, and employers and community-based organizations are co-creating workforce strategies. Employers are identifying high-value credentials and informing workforce needs. Education providers are developing responsive, industry-informed curriculum and credential pathways. And community-based organizations are facilitating recruitment and retention strategies, providing holistic wraparound supports and culturally relevant and responsive workforce services. Industry consortia were established through Future Ready Oregon, and they serve as a model for this shared leadership approach. Consortia are informing policy and program development, building ecosystem alignment, and advancing strategies that address sector-specific workforce needs. In 2023, the HECC convened 3 industry consortia representing the healthcare, manufacturing, and technology sectors. And as conveners of the industry consortia, the HECC is leveraging these partnerships to really expand and inform our sector-specific workforce and talent development expertise. HEC's industry consortia recently played an important role in informing and identifying sector-specific workforce priorities for the third and final round of funding available through the legislature's 2022 investment. Healthcare priorities included nursing career pathways and community identified high demand healthcare occupations. Manufacturing priorities acknowledged Oregon's diverse manufacturing sector and focused on expanding outreach and career exploration initiatives and earn and learn training opportunities. And technology priorities included education and training focused on transferable technology skills required across all sectors of our economy, high-tech career exploration, and programs that would provide for the upskilling or reskilling of adult learners and dislocated or incumbent workers to ensure they're competitive in today's workplace. Industry consortia also recently conducted a series of focus groups with healthcare, manufacturing, and technology employers across the state to better understand their workforce needs and challenges. And these findings will continue to inform the consortia's work in 2025 as we identify high demand occupations, wages, and career and credential pathways in those three sectors, and address barriers to equitable participation in education and employment. HEC's industry consortia are integral to understanding the workforce supply and demand in Oregon. Consortia are leveraging statewide sector strategies that enhance the collective impact of regional and local engagement and implementation efforts. They're advancing promising practices that effectively and efficiently address critical workforce shortages and strategic workforce opportunities in those key sectors of Oregon's economy. And they're identifying replicable and scalable strategies that are responsive to the needs of industry and employers while also centering the needs of students, training participants, and employees. And as identified in an earlier slide, Future Ready Oregon is comprised of 8 programs that strategically work together to align Oregon's workforce and talent development ecosystem. Amy's going to be talking about those in a little more detail. But the largest investment was in Workforce Ready grants, and the HEC established this competitive grant program. And between March of 2022, when the initial legislation passed, and December of 2024, the HEC has awarded approximately $90 million in Workforce Ready grants. Funding was strategically implemented through 3 rounds of competitive funding. An initial round focused on capacity building and expanding the partners that comprise our workforce system. A second round of funding expanded those partnerships and approaches, innovative approaches to education and training. And then, as I mentioned, the third round and final round of funding focused on sector-specific priorities that were informed by our industry consortia. Funding was awarded to workforce service providers and community-based organizations across the state to advance 133 projects that connect diverse learners to career pathways. This map depicts all of those Workforce Ready grant funded projects. And I want to note that all regions of the state are served by Workforce Ready grant funded projects. The pins here represent the organization's headquarters, but their service area is much broader than that single location. Over half of the projects serve 2 or more counties, and 11 of the projects serve participants statewide. Projects are advancing innovative approaches to education and training with clearly defined partnerships, learning pathways that are connected to careers, culturally relevant services, and wraparound supports for participants. And projects support institutions, organizations, and individuals through capacity building, curriculum development, equipment purchase, and student supports. Work-based learning, hands-on training, and mentorships, advanced career preparedness. Community-based organizations are essential partners, and projects are responsive to the needs of community, including bilingual and bicultural curriculum and cultural competency trainings, mobile training opportunities that bring learning to communities, transportation supports and housing and childcare stipends for training participants, and flexible scheduling and learning opportunities that ensure busy adults don't have to choose between work and education. These projects emphasize the ecosystem approach I've been speaking about, where partnerships and shared leadership in program development and project implementation are key to ensuring that outcomes are responsive to the needs of employers while also centering the needs of students and training participants. And with that, I will turn it over to Amy to walk you through the year 3 annual report.
Thanks, Jennifer. Before I start, Susie, could I trouble you to get my cord plugged in next to Mona? Despite my best efforts, I'm afraid I'll lose power. It's an older machine. All right, so let me screen. Good afternoon again. Thanks, Susie. For the record, my name is Amy Cox, and I'm the Director of the Office of Research and Data at the HECC. It is our office's responsibility to track the progress and the impact of Future Ready Oregon. Both the parts that are administered by the HECC that Jennifer spoke to and the parts that are administered by our partners at the Bureau of Labor and Industries and Youth Development Oregon. This is the 3rd annual report, and despite its, or maybe because of its size, it has an unusually long number of statutory requirements, but because of that, perhaps, we have some really, I think, great and interesting findings to share with you today.
On the slides.
Yep. Oh, they're not showing. Well, here you go. The delay.
Yeah.
The aforementioned delay. That I'm sharing.
And I'm seeing them
You're seeing them on
in the
there.
virtual room.
Okay.
Interesting.
You don't have to set 2 screens. I think
I think we can at this point.
And
Let me try.
you want to try sharing it?
Yeah.
Great. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Guthrie.
I have a magic touch or something.
You have magic touch. Yes, excellent. If you could go to the next slide, please. The next slide really lays out where the data come for this report and the questions that we're asking. In general, who's been served, what kind of services have they received, and what are their employment outcomes? And we do that across the whole investment and then within each of the programs, and in particular across the different priority populations laid out in the statute, which Jennifer referenced and are also here on the slide. The report also includes an examination of how each of the programs have continued to progress with their implementation, which becomes quite relevant at the end, I think. And also, how does all of this work compare to Oregon's economic landscape in particular? So a particular set of questions around Oregon's labor force participation and unemployment rates, and how Future Ready Oregon may or may not be contributing to those very large level measures. In general, at a very high level, the 3rd year findings are quite positive and show continued progress in the outcomes envisioned in Future Ready Oregon. From the first participants served it was really about June 2022 through June 2024, almost 15,000 participants have been served across the program. Virtually all of those participants are from low-income backgrounds, which is one of the priority populations. In addition to that, 92% identified with one of the other priority populations. So very strong representation of the priority populations in the program. This obviously is more diverse than our state's labor force in general, which is a very important first step to being able to expand and strengthen the state's labor force in an equitable way. The services provided range from workforce training services to a range of different support services. Workforce training also ranges from general job or career readiness services to training in particular areas or for a particular field. And the support services range from tuition and fees, which is the most commonly awarded support service, to things like job materials, like tools or uniforms, that kind of thing. That's the second most common among participants for the support services. In terms of dollars, tuition and fees also the most common, but food and housing, the second most common basic needs. Participants are receiving on average about 3 services each. And we are seeing a fair amount of consistency across the priority populations in service completion, high service completion in the 90s for every one of the priority populations. This is the first report, the first of the annual reports that includes employment outcomes for the participants. We broke participants into 2 groups, those who were employed at the start and those who were not employed at the start, right? So if you were not employed at the start of participating in a Future Ready Oregon program, we also looked at, well, were you employed afterward? And we found that about 2/3 of the participants, 65%, were employed at the end of services. Now, the 2 times I presented this at the legislature this week, I got the same question, which was, what about the other 35%? And I will tell you that we're not sure yet. We will continue to track that. It may be that the participants who were not employed after services simply are taking a little longer to get employed. We'll continue to look at them a couple quarters out. It may be that they transitioned into a full-time education program and maybe are not employed. We will look at both of those in the coming year and hopefully be able to account for more of the participants' outcomes after their services. Now, for the participants who were employed at the beginning, we saw wage increases, another really important outcome. So those who were employed before they started participating in the program saw their hourly wages go up on average $3 an hour. It's a pretty sizable increase. And on average, the employment data come in at a quarterly level, $700 increase over that 3-month period. So, countable increases in wages for sure. We see these kinds of same outcomes for high levels of employment and and wage increases across the priority populations. So that is also an important piece to note. Almost 1 in 2 of the participants, whether they were employed at the beginning or not, almost 1 in 2 of them are working in healthcare or manufacturing. That is really notable because those are 2 of the industries of focus of Future Ready Oregon, are healthcare and manufacturing. Obviously, that's a much larger share than in the labor force as a whole, right? So that's a really intended outcome as well. There is an important caveat to to really all of these employment outcomes, and that is that we are missing Social Security number for about 1/3 of the participants. Social Security number is the only way we really can track these employment outcomes. It is an important part of our identity. It is something that many people are reluctant to share, understandably so. Of course, we have all of those data in a secure system, and we work with the grantees to guide them and provide support for trauma-informed data collection practices and for the need for each one of the fields that we ask about. That said, there is certainly a range across the programs, especially those who are working more closely with more community-based organizations for how many social security numbers, what percentage of their participants are sharing social security numbers. So that is something we hope we can continue to support them in improving in the year that's to come. I think that seeing the employment outcomes, our hope is that seeing the employment outcomes, which we will also share back with grantees, will help them to understand the need for it. Because it's not only about training the participants as much as about training also the grantees, right? And why we need this data. This is the same kind of outcomes across the 8 programs. Oh, I moved my slides, but you're sharing. Would you share? Thank you. Thank you, Guthrie. Across the 8 programs of Future Ready Oregon, the 2 in the upper right that have the outline around them are the 2 that are managed outside of or administered outside of the HECC. Youth programs working with Youth Development Oregon and registered apprenticeships administered by the Bureau of Labor and Industries. You will see some similar categories here for the different outcomes across these programs, but as Jennifer noted, not all programs serve participants directly. So let me just go through these a little bit. Prosperity 10,000 was the first program that was underway by statute. And it has to date served 5,731 participants through June of this year. It is the only one of the programs that has a sort of numeric objective there of serving 10,000 participants. They're well on track for that because they're about halfway through their period and they've served 5,700 of the 10,000. Very high service completion rate. 97% of participants completing services, 69% of those participants who were not employed at the front end being employed later. And they also have, that program also has a goal of 75% of participants making at least $17.50. So they've met that goal to date as well. That program is administered by the HECC, but really through the local workforce investment boards. The Workforce Ready grants that Jennifer mentioned has to date served 1,539 participants. The beginning of those grants were really focused on capacity building, not on participant serving. So at this point, their participant serving portions have started to certainly ramp up, but this does not include that large third round of grants that she just described. Also a very high service completion rate, 25% of participants receiving support services. That is high among the programs. A lower job placement rate. So we'll continue to look at that as the quarters evolve. Let's see, youth programs, that program will be complete by June of this year. So next year's report will include the last of those participants. A similarly high service completion rate already has served 2,500 participants. Registered apprenticeships is another program that started at the beginning, but because it takes about almost a year to register a new apprenticeship program, they really started serving participants much more in the second year. So they have served 1,200 participants. Those participants have high representation in the focus areas for that program, which are manufacturing, construction, and healthcare. Career Pathways is our ongoing programs at the community colleges that provide training and stackable credentials in very focused career fields. Future Ready Oregon provided funding for that program. Those programs at the colleges in the initial year, both to build infrastructure and for example, think like new equipment, new CTE equipment, also to many of the colleges used that infrastructure, those infrastructure grants, to outreach to priority populations, to be able to draw a more diverse set of students into those programs. It has served almost 4,000 participants with in that very job focused work with a high job placement rate. Credit for prior learning, you heard a lot about earlier today. There's a whole chapter in the report about credit for prior learning here as well. That I think has, as I won't go into greatly because I know Shali talked a lot about the way the colleges and universities used those funds, but it is in the report. The workforce benefits navigators is the, probably a little out of order on the slide, but the program that was stood up last. That's because it's funded solely through ARPA federal funds, so it has a little bit later timeline. But that program is well underway with the local workforce boards creating individual programs in each of the boards to help participants navigate the myriad benefits that they may be eligible for. Some of those programs have individual benefits navigators, like a person, and some of them are online programs. And then the industry consortia that Jennifer spoke to as well are well underway, those three industry focused programs. Good question. Yes.
Is the asterisk next to the job placement rate on several of those because of the social security number incompleteness or because they're in the middle of their rollout?
That is a Chair Rowe, Commissioner, that is a really good question, and I apologize for not explaining that. It is really because of the Social Security rate caveat. They're all in many ways sort of in process, all of the programs. So these are I would think of these findings as a snapshot. I would not think of these findings as the last of the story by any means. They're all definitely in process. The programs that have the asterisk have low enough social security number reporting that we recommend particular caution.
Sure, the 32%
Yes.
job placement rate might be.
Exactly. A good example. Yes. Next slide, please. I want to return here to two questions that we laid out 2 years ago when we first began designing this multi-year evaluation of this very large set of 8 programs. And these two questions are really driven by the statute. Does Future Ready Oregon lead to greater prosperity, economic prosperity? And does Future Ready Oregon lead to greater equity? And the answers to these questions also will continue to evolve as more data come in and more outcomes we can track. But I would say in this 3rd year report, we are beginning to form some answers to them. And the answers at this point in time are yes. Yes, it is. It is leading to greater economic prosperity. We are seeing participants become employed and have wage gains. We're seeing them employed in focus industries that have particular labor shortages. We're seeing participants who are more diverse than the labor force, which suggests, but does not at all preclude, but suggests perhaps an expansion to the labor force. Of course, this social security number issue is a caveat, but the evidence is lining up in a pretty consistent fashion. In terms of equity, same thing. The evidence is lining up in a pretty consistent fashion, even though the programs are still evolving. We are seeing not only strong representation of priority populations, we're seeing consistent outcomes across them. We're seeing high service completion rates. We're seeing employment. We're seeing wage gains across all of the priority populations. That is, and across the programs, with the representation of priority populations and the high service completion rates across the programs as well. There is this note here, we do see an underrepresentation of older workers. So one of the priority populations is persons who might be more likely to face employment discrimination on the basis of age. That can include both younger and older workers. And older workers, those over 40, is how we've defined it. I know I'm very well. Are the only group there that we see underrepresented among the participants. So I want to conclude here with a couple findings and recommendations that we have put in the report. Next slide, please. Jeffrey, thank you. The first one is about this strong representation of priority populations in among the participants. It is striking the degree of representation, and we have tracked, as I mentioned, the implementation of each of these 8 programs in the last 2 reports and provide a summary in this year's report as well. And what we have seen across the programs is strong engagement with priority population communities. We believe these are very much related because it has been such consistent outreach and such intentional engagement and such infrastructure building. And then we see the strong representation of priority populations in among participants. We want to make sure that grantees are continuing to do this. You know, don't stop what's working. And so the recommendation here is really to continue this success. The second recommendation is really around Oregonians age 40 and older. And that is because of the underrepresentation there, and because this is a growing portion of the state's population and a growing portion of the state's economy. We recommend specific outreach to Oregonians age 40 and older. It's simply not feasible to satisfy labor shortages, to meet labor needs, to expand the labor force, and not expand it among Oregonians 40 and older. Next slide. The third recommendation is for grantees to enhance their data collection practices. We work closely with them and have from the start with training and trauma-informed data collection materials to try and maximize the data that participants are willing to share, and that grantees are willing to do the really hard work of collecting and submitting. That's required work on the grantee's part, but it is time consuming when, you know, they want to be serving participants. It is the only way we can effectively really track all of the outcomes. And it's not only about Social Security numbers, it's also about things like the services, the job training services. We have a pretty low percentage of those services being reported as actually focused in job training in particular industries. We think it's higher. And so we have worked and will continue to work with grantees to try and strengthen that reporting. And then the last finding, or the last recommendation, is not based on a particular finding. It is based really on the goals of the program and the fact that it's halfway through its time period. So we want to make sure, the recommendation here is to make sure that grantees are engaging Oregonians outside of the labor force, those who have not been employed for a long time, not only those who are recently unemployed. And the reason for that is because Future Ready Oregon needs to both help participants upskill and increase their wages and get into a career that allows for career growth. The goals also include reaching Oregonians who are not employed to expand that labor force and meet those labor needs. We do not have evidence that grantees are not doing this. I want to make that clear. We really can't measure it yet without the full or a fuller set of Social Security numbers. But rather, we don't want to wait until next year and raise this issue when there's only 6 months left in the program. So that's why we've put that here, to make sure that grantees are remembering the really somewhat more difficult outreach to Oregonians who haven't been employed for some time, as well as those who are more recently unemployed. I know that was a lot. I'm going to pause and see what questions, if any, there are.
Hey, James. So I just have a quick question on that recommendation for where you say individuals currently outside the labor force, not only those who are unemployed. So outside of the labor force, you're saying those are people who have been unemployed a long time? I guess it's not really clear to me who would be outside the labor force. That's an odd way of.
So this is, these are definitions that are, thank you so much for the question. It's a really good question. And we have worked hard to try and clarify this in the report. It's a set of terms and definitions that economists use across the country. And we certainly can't change them, neither the terms nor the definitions, and have the report be comparable in a way. But outside of that world, they're not terms we all use, right? So the labor force consists of those who are currently working and those who are currently looking for work or have in the last month. So if you have not been looking for work in the last month, actively looking for work in the last month, and you're not working right now, you're considered you're considered not in the labor force. So these would be, so the people that we're talking about outside of the labor force are people who have been not employed for many months, many years, if ever at all. They're undoubtedly facing a higher level of barrier, or they would be employed, right? Disability, childcare issues, lack of skills, a number of different potential reasons.
Thank you.
If I quickly add on to that, that was part of my question of what qualifies unemployed. So I guess a question might already be answered, but is there any qualification for people who provide those critical, important domestic services who are working but do not get a direct W-2 paycheck?
Chair Rowe, Commissioner, it's a very good question. And in parts of the report, we use the term the paid labor force to address exactly this issue. The labor force as typically used and measured, and as measured in this report, includes only paid employment. Which is why I referenced childcare. But of course, it's not only childcare. It can be elder care. It can be adult child care. It can be, sibling care. It can be lots of care, right? That can take up an entire day, well past a work day, and not be compensated. And those individuals are often outside of the labor force. Yes.
I feel like it's, at least to me right now, specifically magnified because of the sandwich generation. And that's directly, right, you're looking at people who are 40 right now who are taking care of the retirees.
Mm-hmm. It is a very real issue. Yes.
Mr. Martinez.
Thank you. I also was questioning on, or had a question about are you doing any kind of exit interviews with those who are not completing as to what barriers are still there, even though they have all of these arrays of services? And then I also just wanted to speak to the childcare, because I kept saying that it's underutilized, yet we're hearing that people need it. It's very complex, and throwing money per se may not even be helpful with the population that I believe this is probably serving qualifies for most of the free care. So it's not the issue of paying for it, it's the issue of finding it and accessing it. Yes.
Thank you very much, Chair Rowe, Commissioner. Yes, the childcare issue is complex, and we do not. It deserves a whole report in and of itself, I would say, and is unfortunately not something we were able to delve into in greater detail. I would add that, and the issues you raise, I couldn't agree more. It is about paying for it. It is about finding it. And I would add, it is about finding someone whom you trust to leave your child with, right? So the availability of childcare does not mean that child, which it's not available right now, right? Like we have a shortage of childcare. It also is childcare that you would trust to leave your child with, right? Yeah, and that your child's going to be cared for and safe, you know? We do see childcare under used but at lower rates by participants than we expected. Given the anecdotal evidence that we've heard about the need and also just our own knowledge, labor force data of the shortage, right? And we're not sure how all of the reasons under that, right? And how much of that has anything to do with Future Ready Oregon. If there are things that grantees could do differently. So, I mean, we called it out, but there's a whole area there to explore. In terms of your first question about exit interviews and what barriers are individuals still facing, we are not able to do exit interviews with the respondents or with the participants, excuse me, but it is definitely an area that we will be following up with grantees on further to better understand what they are seeing, right? Because there are high service completion rates. So that is happening. Right. And that alone can be challenging. So, the grantees get, real credit for the programs, the administrators working with the grantees for those high service completion rates. And services range. They range from, a few hours or a half a day to a few months, right? And yet still we're seeing these high service completion rates. And it will be very interesting to see what we hear from grantees and also what we see as we get sort of some more quarters of data in. Are we seeing people connecting to education? Are we seeing people connecting to employment just a little bit later? Are we seeing them coming back in for services? These kinds of things are things that we'll be looking at in the coming year.
And if I may, our grantees, in addition to providing quarterly data, also provide quarterly narrative reporting. So we do have some of that on the childcare question. We have heard from grantees that access to available childcare that's available at the days and times needed, that those culturally relevant childcare, those are all issues. And part of what our grant administrators do is engage in technical assistance with grantees, act as a resource to connect to our partners across the state enterprise who are actively investing in early childcare expansion, as well as other barriers to education that may not be our primary policy area.
And one of the reasons we call it out in the report is because we want to make sure that the grantees, our partner agencies, hear that we have heard this need. Are you working? Are you doing this, right? And we have less visibility into some of that outside of the agency than we do inside of the agency. And sometimes also there is a situation, we heard this morning actually, and in the presentation this morning from one of the grantees, that childcare hadn't been highly used in by their participants for two reasons. One, because they were partnering with a community college that had childcare. So the participants were finding it in another way. And also because many participants were employed and had already had childcare, and the training was happening as part of the employment. It was an earn and learn situation. And so that the need wasn't there for their participants in the same way. So it's helpful.
Okay, this is an action item, commissioners. Thank you very much, especially for multiple presentations, Jennifer and Amy. We appreciate it. It's an action item. Motion, please.
I'll move that we accept the Future Ready Oregon program and annual report.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you again. You've had a full day. Okay, our next item is career readiness certificate. It is also an action item, and there's Wayne.
And if you'll just give me a moment to transition audio.
Guthrie's computer, huh?
Mm-hmm. Wayne, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, you're good to proceed.
All right. Thank you very much. For the record, Wayne Fano, Office of Workforce Investments, Higher Education Coordinating Commission, annual report on the National Career Readiness Certificate, the NCRC. It is a product that we offer by statute to all Oregonians. To date, we've had just over 92,000 Oregonians complete a certificate. Certificates do come at different levels, designated by colors of minerals, I guess, of metals, bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. Eligibility again is to all Oregonians. We do limit their ability to retest once they obtain a gold certificate. We don't continue to provide that service to maintain some barrier to the inflation of using this product. We do find that some people have ego issues, I'll say, where they feel like they need to get a platinum and they'll continue to retest and retest. So we do limit how often they can retest, and also that once they achieve a gold certificate, that we do not provide the service any further. The program provides multiple benefits, namely that it gives a certificate to people who lack any certification for individuals who leave the educational system before attaining a high school diploma or a GED, also for different entities or organizations that may require a certificate, and talk a little bit more about that directly related to apprenticeship. And it shows confidence in individuals as they go out to get work that they have a certificate. It really affects their ability to present themselves well. I find it interesting that I follow the discussion with Future Ready Oregon, and that with the federal government, they talk about braided services of using local and federal money in order to enhance. I see the Future Ready and the NCRC as a braided type of service, not really meeting the federal definition, but I know that there are multiple apprenticeship programs, pre-apprenticeship programs that require the NCRC, and these are programs that were funded by Future Ready. It also, we're talking about the types of individuals who are involved in Future Ready. These are the type of individuals who participate in the NCRC. So I see that as a real win-win between the two activities. Another component of the NCRC that's very helpful to local communities is the certified work-ready communities. It's done by county levels. It's used very effectively by site selection groups to identify counties, regions, work sheds that have specific skills as individuals try to bring in new industries into a county or into a region. Those that are certified work-ready communities can identify themselves as having those. Site Selection Magazine identified the work-ready community as one of the top 5 components that are important to a new site being used and developed. So I'll continue to use that and encourage our local communities to participate in that. The certificate itself is at a gold and platinum level, allows for individuals through the American Council on Education, and also some of the community colleges also will award credit up to 9 lower division transferable credits as elective type of credits to individuals that earn a certificate at that level. So we do see a benefit in that, and participation by high schools and high school students in looking to earn some of those credits. In terms of participation, again, if we go look backwards, 2020 was very disruptive with COVID in that the NCRC is a high stakes proctored assessment. And so for all intents and purposes, it stopped for at least 9 months, longer in certain areas. We have seen it recover, but at a fairly slow rate. One of the reasons it has decreased in numbers is the change in high school graduation requirement. High schools used it fairly extensively to meet essential skills, and essential skills have not been added back to the graduation requirement. With that said, specific school districts are re-engaging over time and using it more and more. The other place we've seen an increase is within apprenticeship programs. Every year we see a few more apprenticeship programs who will add the NCRC as a requirement for application with discussions with those JATC committees that manage the apprenticeship programs. They're very happy with its ability to show skills in the math, reading, and graphic literacy that they see as important to their apprentices coming into their programs. So that's probably the greatest growth we've seen is with apprenticeship programs. If we look at the chart on page 7 of the report, 2024 represents through 3 quarters. If we extrapolate that to last year, to 2023, we're about 50 certificates ahead. So a slight growth that we would anticipate for the full year. We won't have those numbers until mid-January. So that's why we just report for the first 3 quarters and have done it in that format throughout the reporting period. So I guess the last thought is we also have seen an increase again in justice-involved entities with an interest and use of the NCRC. Again, other states have used it extensively, and we also see it as a real opportunity to provide a certificate for individuals who are reintegrating into society who may or may not have a way to prove their skill set as they look for employment and like I said, reintegrating back into their previous lives. Any questions at this point?
Questions? Thank you for that good overview. Okay, again, this is an action item, commissioners. So we need a motion to accept this report. So moved. Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The report is accepted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Clifton Docks on the Lower Columbia. It's a beautiful place, truly is. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go back over to the room audio.
We're good to go? And we're
Yes,
gonna have
and yes, but now we're going to have the subcommittee report.
Thank you, Chair. I am reporting on yesterday's meeting of the Funding and Achievement Subcommittee. Thank you, commissioners and staff that were there and participated. The meeting consisted of 2 items. I'm going to provide a brief report. One is that report, and the other is an action item. So first is on the community college financial conditions report framework. Some of us have been around. Remember back a while ago in 2023, actually, that became that, well, we do this report for the universities. Why don't we do one for the community college with Sam? And gosh, it seemed so simple at the time. But took that conversation seriously and was more investigate and develop recommendations of what that would look like. These yesterday's report from Richard Bickard and community college presidents, Randy River and Lisa Scari, really presented a pretty comprehensive understanding and collaborative support for a report that would provide us a window on the financial conditions as it relates to community colleges. I think one of the things we recognize in there in the recommendations that the report that comes from the community colleges would be a separate report, not an extension of an expansion of the other report. And the framework for that report will not be just quantitative information, but qualitative data. It provides a context to help us understand that. Also, that content balances statewide data with individual information and trends, so we can help us. So we understand individual institutions' data in the context of the broader. Like there may be something happening at state level, national level, that we want to interpret individuals' data in that context. That there, and that will be a collaborative implementation to support the publication of that report for the first time in June 2025. So, working towards that, and so I think that was a really positive report where we're at in that work. So that came out of a conversation at our commission meeting. The second is a action item. I like to call that you get capital construction information forward that information that comes to us from community colleges is dictated or structured through administrative rule, and there have been similar procedures for the universities, but it has not been established in administrative rule. So what this second item is, and is an action item, is essentially taking a procedure that we've been using in regards to assessing and making determinations on university capital construction and turning that into something of a parallel administrative rule that addresses university capital construction in a similar manner that we look at a college construction. Great presentation. Jim Pinker presented that to us, and the subcommittee unanimously supported that, and so it comes to you with our recommendation that you support it as well. So if you have any questions, that's where we're at.
And the process has been working so well that some of us didn't even realize that we did not have a permanent rule. So this is a permanent rule chasing a successful process. Thank you very much for that report. And any questions for Jim Pinker, or is he just here for show? Any questions? Okay, can we have a motion to approve, please? So moved. Second. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We now have a permanent rule. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Beat that for efficiency.
Okay, and now we are to the point of the program where we're going to talk about how we review the executive director. You stay for this?
Yeah. This is, we're in the process.
Okay, that's right.
You're welcome. For the record, I'm Susie Hopi, HR Director. And I'm really happy to be here in person. We'll be spending more time together in February when we have executive session. And I'm your closer. So exciting. So I know you're probably like, let's get through this. Just in the summary, just have the overview that we have a long-standing process. So Ben's been evaluated multiple times from the beginning of HECC. We developed a comprehensive process in 2017. And since then, we've been doing, for the most part, we were doing annual. Pandemic threw us off a bit. We were doing 360s or 270s. We knew in 2022 that the governor was going to change that process and wanted to, for all agency heads, and because not all agency heads were getting evaluations. So we paused what we were doing because we knew that change was coming. And so now with the governor's changes, it will be a 360 at least every 2 years. On their timeline, he's a December even year. Right? So we're launching this month, and all agency heads are using Gallup.
the provider. And so what we've done is I've been working with Gallup with our previous kind of questions that we had established and incorporating the governor's required ones, which were also kind of in the summary document. So this will be our first time using Gallup. Some of the questions were very similar. So those ones so it's just kind of that kind of merging of the two processes. And we'll go over the details together. We have a self-evaluation that will also kind of be a merging of the two. We had our established questions and the governor's questions will also be incorporated into that. And we are set to launch as soon as tomorrow or Monday. If people want to kind of do stuff over the weekend, I guess that we can. We're ready to launch as soon as tomorrow. And then we'll have it open for at least 2 weeks. And if there's a need to do any extensions, we can always work with Gallup on just because of the holidays and the timing. So that's kind of where we're at overall. Any questions? No, it's fun talking about maybe they're all setting it up here.
Just touch on what the next step is after we send, so you'll send the link.
Yeah.
And we all fill in status forms. What's the next step after that, please?
Yeah, so I'll be sending out an email just as a heads up for everyone, for all the parties, so they know that they'll be receiving a Gallup email. We did this internally for the first time this last year too, using Gallup. So it's just that surprise. We want people to be aware that, hey, this may look like spam. It's not spam. Please, complete that. So I'll do that heads up email to everyone. We'll get that feedback and we'll meet and kind of do that summary of everything together in January and meet with the chairs. That's kind of what we've done in the past. So if we keep our similar process, we'll have a pre-planning kind of meeting. Then we'll have completed his self-evaluation either at the end of this month or early January. So we'll have that all incorporated. And then kind of that planning for the overall shared discussion with the commission. Now, the new part, and Ben will fill us in on how this works out. That's not part of our process, as the governor also has her own process. And once this wraps up, Ben is also meeting with the governor's office and the governor as part of that process as well. So that'll be also kind of part of the holistic process.
Yeah, and I think my sense was that the chair would be invited to that meeting as well on behalf of the commission. So
yeah, the chair
it is new, but the results of the survey will be presented to the chair and vice chair likely. I will meet with them, with you in January to plan for the February executive session. You will all be a part of it, where you will all be reviewing the survey feedback. And it's like 100 some folks who are going to receive the survey, both direct reports and some of our bunch of external partners, all of you. And then you'll review that and you will determine in executive session how to sort of finalize the commission's evaluation, including what to report publicly. And that will then be presented to the governor and the governor's chief operating officer, and there will be some kind of meeting with them.
Yeah, and then our ongoing process was through the having our commission meeting in February, that we would develop our own commission letter to the governor with an outcome and finding. So it'll be interesting just because again, there's already going to be direct conversations, right, with the governor. And what they're going to be focusing on is only the questions that are kind of outlined in their process. So we have our additional questions that are holistic for us and for the commission. Her focus will be on just those main handful of questions.
Very good. Thank you. Questions, Ben?
Yeah, I was looking at the application, and so it says something about small boards and commissions may choose to add additional questions that apply to their business. However, the following questions must also be included in the feedback request. So who determines if there are additional questions? The chair or
we did. So we already had them established in 2017. So it's a similar question. So really, so now what we'll do when we go through this process we can also have that conversation, you know, in February of, you know, what changes might make sense for the next iteration, especially because it's the first time kind of merging them.
Any other questions?
I'll just minute. It's 100
Yeah.
140 people that see this invite. So it's like that's who I work on.
Sitting at your family members too.
But no. See the list. There are no candidates on it.
Okay, well, we look forward to that. Thank you for the heads up on this, Susie, appreciate it. Commissioners, a couple of things. First, I want to thank you very much, those of you who were able to come in person, especially with our technical difficulties. It really made a difference to have all of us in the center, almost all of us. We know everybody can't make it every time, but we're going to continue to emphasize that the meetings when we are in person, we want to try to have good attendance, and you sure made that happen. So I appreciate it. Thanks to you, Guthrie. We really appreciate it. It was a very good agenda. Thanks to the HECC staff for getting all of these reports done for us and for holding our hand and walking us through them and explaining it. So it was very good meeting. I appreciate all the help and support, and happy holidays, everybody. We're adjourned.